Ready for something different? Today, we're heading to the Nilgiri Hills in southern India.
Beautiful area.
It is, yeah. We're diving deep into the world of the Todas.
Fascinating tribe.
Totally. High-altitude plateau, villages unlike anything you've probably seen, and a culture that existed, like, totally isolated for centuries.
Until the Europeans, of course, in the 1800s.
Exactly. And that's where our main source material comes in W.H.R. Rivers.
British anthropologist.
Right. He lived among the Todas in the early 1900s, and his book, published in 1906, it's like a snapshot of their lives before the outside world really made its mark.
A valuable resource for sure.
Totally. Now, I'm guessing most people listening have never even heard of the Todas.
Probably not, no.
But their way of life, it's like both familiar, like, we can kind of relate, but also totally unique.
It really makes you think, yeah. About how, where you live, what you believe, how you make a living, how it all comes together to shape a culture.
It's like nature versus nurture on a grand scale.
In a way, yeah. And speaking of nature, the Nilgiri Hills themselves played a huge part in how Toda life developed.
Oh, for sure. Those hills are, like, no joke. They go up to 7,500 feet.
Exactly. Undulating terrain, high elevation, it's the perfect setup for the pastoral lifestyle they adopted.
It's kind of crazy how the land itself can, like, set a culture on a certain path.
Oh, absolutely. It's a constant interplay.
So let's get down to basics. Who are the Todas?
Small tribe,
Yeah.
native to the Nilgiri Hills.
Okay, got it.
Pastoral people, deeply connected to their land. And their whole world revolves around, well, two things, really. Buffalo herding and dairy production.
Dairy production. Okay, now that's something I can wrap my head around. Everyone loves cheese, right?
True.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. For the Todas, buffalo aren't just livestock. They're sacred, like deeply interwoven with their beliefs and rituals. Each buffalo even has its own unique name.
Wow, really? A name for every single buffalo. That's dedication.
And there's more. Their breeding practices. They actually prioritize the sacred lineage of the buffalo over, like, practical concerns. They're not just thinking about milk yield, they're thinking about the spiritual lineage of these animals.
That is so different from how we think about dairy farming today.
Completely different mindset.
So sacred buffalo lineages, that's a new one. It sounds like there's a strong religious element to their dairy farming.
Oh, absolutely. The dairy itself is a sacred space for them.
Huh.
And they have two types, conical and rectangular, each with its own specific architectural features.
Yeah.
And the whole process of milk production, steeped in rituals. And get this, they have a whole social hierarchy tied to it.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. It's like dairy farming meets ancient ritual. I'm starting to see why we chose this deep dive.
It's a fascinating blend.
And speaking of, like, social structures, you mentioned clans, right? And other groups within the Toda tribe.
Yeah, so you've got the two main clans, the Tavalial and Tartharal,
Okay, two main clans. Got it.
each with their own set of villages and customs. And then within the clans, you have these smaller groups called maddals.
Maddals, another layer of complexity. This whole system of clans and maddals is kind of like a puzzle where each piece represents a different level of belonging.
Exactly. And this kind of social complexity isn't uncommon, especially in cultures where resources are shared.
Makes sense. Got to keep things organized. Now, one thing that really caught my eye in the research was this idea of seasonal migration.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not nomadic, not in the traditional sense, but they do move between villages throughout the year.
Often for better grazing or sometimes to mark special occasions.
Right. It's like this cool blend of settled life, but with these periods of movement tied to the buffalo and the seasons.
Their understanding of the environment is really impressive. They're adapting to the changing conditions in the Nilgiri Hills.
Smart. Now let's talk about the person at the heart of it all, the Wursel.
The dairyman priest.
Yeah. This guy, he's not just making cheese, he's basically a living link between the sacred buffalo and the Toda people. And, like, his job comes with a ton of rules and rituals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
For instance, before entering the dairy, he has to cleanse himself with water, always wears a specific cloak. There's even a specific way of, like, prostrating himself at the entrance.
Whoa. So much ceremony.
It's all about maintaining ritual purity, preparing to enter a sacred space.
So, like, drawing a line between the sacred and the everyday.
Yeah.
Got it. And he's got help, right? There's the Palo and the Koltmak.
Two other key players for sure.
And these guys, they can't just, like, hang out and chat while they're working. There are, like, super strict rules about how they interact.
Physical contact between a Palo and Koltmak is actually forbidden.
Seriously. Wow.
And they have to occupy different spaces within the dairy, like talk about social distancing, huh?
Right. It's all about maintaining ritual purity, especially for the Palo. He's considered to be in a state of, like, heightened purity.
Any contact with someone of a lower status could, potentially contaminate that.
Wow, every detail is so carefully considered. And
Yeah.
to even get those roles, they go through some pretty intense ceremonies. Right?
Oh, yeah. These ceremonies involve prayers, purification rituals, symbolic actions. It's a big deal.
And it shows how important these roles are to their whole community.
It's not just about training someone for a job. It's about transforming their identity.
Deep stuff. Now, there's this one ceremony that I found really interesting, the Pekaricha ceremony.
Yes.
It really highlights the level of, like, care and attention to detail the Todas put into their dairy practices. It's about creating and purifying a new pep, a container for buttermilk.
Not just a quick rinse.
No way. Tell me more.
We're talking cleansing with water, purifying with fire, even rubbing it with specific plants.
Oh, wow. It's a whole process.
It is.
So, we've talked about the people, the rituals, but even the way their villages are laid out is super interesting.
Yeah. It reflects their beliefs about, everything.
Give us the tour. What's a typical village like?
Small group of huts, often enclosed by a wall.
Okay. Defensive.
Could be, yeah. And there's a single opening. And certain areas, especially paths leading to the dairy, they're off limits to women.
Really?
They have to stick to designated routes.
It's like the village is a map of their beliefs.
Exactly. And they even have special stones, mahavituko. They mark spots where women can stand to receive buttermilk from the dairyman.
So it's not just about keeping women out of the dairy, it's about, like, creating designated spaces for interaction. Fascinating.
It is.
And what about the guys? What do they do when they're not busy with dairy stuff?
Lots of things. They might go to the bazaar to trade, participate in village meetings.
Makes sense. But I bet there are tasks that are strictly women's work.
Oh, for sure. Things like collecting firewood or getting leaves to use as plates. Those are considered women's jobs.
Okay, so even within the village, there's this clear division of labor. And, we've talked about rules, rituals, but even the way they interact with each other is really interesting, like this practice of kalspimi.
Ah, yes.
It really highlights the level of respect and formality they have in their interactions.
Essentially a ritualized bow, mostly done by men.
Okay, men only. Got it. What's it look like?
They bow low, touch a stone, or even the ground while greeting someone.
Wow, that's deep respect. And women, they do something different.
They have their own form of salutation, yeah, but it's more subtle.
Interesting. So we've got the sacred buffalo, the dairy practices, the social structure, but it's all connected by this thread of ritual, right?
Ritual is the glue that holds it all together, for sure.
It's everywhere, from daily offerings at the dairy to the way they lay out their villages.
They have ceremonies for everything.
Yeah.
Ordination of priests, seasonal events, buffalo migrations.
It's like ritual is woven into the fabric of their existence.
It is.
And water plays a big part in a lot of these rituals.
For purification, right? Incredibly important, yeah. They cleanse themselves and objects with water before and after important activities.
Makes sense. Symbolically and practically.
Exactly. And they also use specific plants. Rivers mentions tud leaves being important.
Used for what?
They rub them on the body during purification ceremonies. They seem to hold some symbolic significance.
Interesting. So we're seeing this deep connection to nature, this understanding of the natural world and how it relates to their belief systems.
Their entire way of life reflects that connection. The high altitude, the terrain, the forests, it's all shaped who they are.
Totally. Now, there's this one place, the time ad, that I wanted to ask about.
Ah, yes. Sacred space.
Yeah, it's often associated with their dairy rituals, but it seems like it's like more than just a piece of land.
It is. Usually enclosed by a wall, has restrictions on who can enter, just like certain spaces within the dairy.
Right. Maintaining purity is key. Even the wursel has to follow specific rules when entering.
Exactly. It's about respecting the sacredness of the space.
And within this sacred space, we find the Thai dairy. What makes it so special? How's it different from the village dairy?
Well, it's conical in structure and shrouded in an aura of, sanctity. Rivers actually recorded a legend about how the first Thai dairy came to be. Involves a goddess, a dispute. It's fascinating.
A mythological origin story for their dairy practices.
Exactly. And each Thai dairy, it has its own significance and rituals. For instance, Rivers describes this ceremony, where the Wursel takes buttermilk from the Thai dairy and places it in a small pit within the Thai mat,
What's that all about?
honoring the sacredness of the space, acknowledging the importance of the buffalo.
It's like layering meaning upon meaning. I love it. And remember, we're dealing with Rivers' meticulous notes from the early 1900s. He even recorded the specific buffalo names associated with each Thai dairy. Names like Kudisi, Kasi, and Pern.
Amazing level of detail.
It is. It's like we're peeking into the past. And what's even more remarkable is that even though, the world has changed, the Todas, their core beliefs and practices, especially around the buffalo and the dairy, they've remained largely intact.
A remarkable continuity.
Now, I'm curious about the social organization within the clans. We've talked about the Metal, those smaller groups, but what else did Rivers discover?
Well, the Metal are key to understanding Toda's social dynamics.
How so?
They affect marriage patterns, social interactions. Even the Tay dairies are often associated with specific metal.
So it's like you're part of Metal, which is part of a clan, which is part of the Toda tribe. It's like those Russian nesting dolls.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that sense of belonging, it extends to their relationship with the land, the buffalo, everything. It's a truly holistic way of life.
It makes you wonder if there are things we in our modern world could learn from the Todas. The importance of community, respect for the natural world.
Definitely food for thought.
Okay, so we focus a lot on the Thai dairies, but let's circle back to those village dairies.
Right.
They're usually rectangular, a bit simpler than the Thai dairy, yeah.
Yeah, typically 2 or 3 rooms, each with a specific purpose and level of sanctity.
Okay, break it down for me.
So you have the palatmar, where the fresh milk is kept and churned.
Got it. What else?
Then there's the urtidmar, where they keep all the vessels for storing and processing the dairy products.
Makes sense. Separate spaces for different stages.
Exactly. And then there's the kalkani.
The what?
The kalkani is like the inner sanctum,
where
where the milk is poured, churned, transformed into, well, all those sacred products.
Right, the heart of the dairy.
It is.
And of course, we can't forget the pep.
Those special containers for the buttermilk.
Yeah, they're not just containers, they're almost like works of art.
Some of them are beautifully carved, yeah.
Each pep has a specific purpose.
Absolutely. They're all part of the dairy rituals.
Speaking of, we got to talk about the Toda creation myth.
Always a good place to start, right?
Right. It highlights just how deep their connection to the buffalo goes.
Oh, it goes deep. According to the myth, the first Toda man was created from the rib of a buffalo.
Whoa. From the rib, that's serious.
The right rib, to be precise.
Okay, the right rib. So it's not just any old buffalo rib.
No, very specific. And he wasn't alone. He had a sister, created from the left rib of the same buffalo.
Wow, so they're like cosmic twins?
Exactly. They became the ancestors of all the Todas.
Yeah.
The buffalo is like this, divine parent figure.
That's a powerful image. And their story, it's filled with all these details that show how they see the world. Like the myth describes how the first Toda man had to learn to make fire from the Badagas.
Another tribe in the Nilgiri hills.
Right. Even in their origin story, we see this acknowledgement that no one exists in isolation.
It's about relationships with other tribes, with nature.
Totally. And we can't forget the goddess Tekirsi. She's like the big boss in Toda mythology.
The protector of the Todas, the giver of buffalo. She's associated with the Tay dairies. She's everywhere.
So she's a pretty big deal. And speaking of the bigger picture, we've got to talk about how the Todas interact with those other tribes they share the Nilgiri hills with.
It's a fascinating dynamic.
Lay it out for me.
You got the Todos, focused on the buffalo and dairy. Then you have the Badagas, they're the agriculturalists. And the Kodas, they're the artisans and craftsmen.
Okay, so 3 distinct groups.
And their economies are intertwined.
So like a natural exchange of goods and services.
Exactly. The Todas give the Badagas dairy products, and in return, they get grain and other necessities.
Smart. Everyone benefits. And what about the Kodas?
They provide the Todas with essential tools and objects.
So they're like the skilled craftspeople keeping things running.
Pretty much.
It's a great system. I bet it runs smoothly most of the time.
It does, yeah. But of course, there are tensions sometimes. Rivers mentions this conflict.
Right.
A Toda accusing a Koda of stealing a buffalo.
Oh, no.
It happens. But they had ways of resolving these disputes.
Well, that's good. So even in a place that seems like idyllic, you still get human drama.
Huh.
Exactly. Now let's get back to those Thai dairies. We've talked about their sacred nature, the priests who tend them, but what exactly makes them so special? Why are they treated with such reverence?
They're believed to be the dwelling places of gods.
Whoa, so you're not just walking into a building, you're entering a divine realm.
Exactly. And the structures themselves, they're very distinctive.
Describe them.
Circular, typically,
Mm.
conical thatched roof. In the design, it's remained basically unchanged for centuries.
Wow, that's incredible.
It is. It speaks to the power of tradition, their dedication to preserving their sacred practices.
It's like the past is always present for the Todas. Their rituals and beliefs are how they connect to their ancestors, how they maintain their cultural identity.
Exactly. It's about continuity.
Now, you mentioned that there are certain objects inside the Taideris that are considered super sacred.
Oh, yeah.
I want to hear all about them. Tell me more.
Okay, so one of the most important objects is the mani. It's a bell.
A bell, okay.
But not just any bell. The Todas believe it's like the embodiment of the Taideri's power. They say it has supernatural qualities, like if it's ever removed from the Taideri, bad things will happen to the whole community.
A bell with magical powers.
It's a protective talisman, a symbol of their well-being.
Ah.
And it's not just for decoration.
Right.
The Wurzel actually uses the mani during the rituals
How?
to summon the buffalo for milking for other ceremonies.
Cool. So it's like this tangible link between the sacred and the practical. I like that.
Me too.
Okay, so we've got the mani. What other treasures are hidden in there?
Well, there's also the poet.
The poet. Okay, what's that?
It's a brass vessel. And they believe it contains the, how do I put this? The essence of the Taideri.
The essence. Okay, that sounds deep.
It represents the sacred power, the energy that resides within the dairy.
Powerful stuff.
And like the mani, it's used in the rituals.
I bet. So these aren't just like random objects lying around. They each have a specific purpose, a meaning.
Absolutely. Everything within the Tairi is there for a reason.
So it's not just a building. It's a like microcosm of their whole belief system.
Exactly. Every object tells a story, connects to their traditions.
No, we've talked about the ordained priest, the Wursal. But becoming one, it's not just like you apply for the job. It's a whole process, right?
Oh, yeah. It's a journey, a testament to their dedication.
So tell me, how does someone become a Wursal?
Well, it starts with the Palkermok ceremony. It's like a symbolic cleansing.
A cleansing?
Yeah, they use tud leaves and water, and the candidate has to abstain from certain foods and activities.
It's like a separation from ordinary life.
Exactly. They're preparing to enter this sacred realm.
Intense. Okay, so that's the first step. Then what?
Then comes the Wursal ceremony. This one officially elevates them to the rank of priest.
This is a bigger deal, right?
Oh yeah, big celebration. The whole village gets involved.
Wow. What happens during the ceremony?
The candidate performs a series of ritual actions. Lighting a lamp, offering milk to the gods, taking a sacred oath.
It's like a symbolic rebirth.
It is. They're stepping into a new identity.
So we've got the Pulkerpark, the Wursal. Are there any other levels?
Well, if you want to become the Polo, remember the assistant in the Taideri.
Right.
That requires an even higher level of ordination.
Seriously. Wow.
Yeah. And the Polo ordination, it's super rare. Only for those who are like exceptionally pious and dedicated.
So it's like the ultimate spiritual achievement.
Pretty much.
And I bet the ceremony for that is like next level.
Oh, it is. Multiple days of rituals, pilgrimages to sacred sites, fasting. Rivers described it as a truly amazing spectacle.
I bet. Okay, so we've got these 3 levels of ordination. The Palkertmak, the Wursal, the Palo, each with its own rituals, its own significance.
And they all reflect that hierarchical structure of the Toda priesthood.
Right. Each level has its own duties and responsibilities.
Exactly.
It's really impressive how they've managed to keep these practices alive for so long.
It is. Especially with all the changes they have experienced.
It's like a testament to how important their faith is to them, their cultural identity.
And their adaptability, too. They've had to find ways to adapt to a changing world.
That's true. All right, so we've got a pretty good grasp of their priesthood, those Taideris. But what about the bigger picture? How does this all fit into the overall structure of their society? Tell me about Toda's social hierarchy.
It's all connected to their dairy practices.
Really? How so?
The Wursal, the Palol, the Kaltmok, they're not just job titles.
Right. They're positions of respect.
Exactly. The Wursal, for instance, he has a lot of influence. He helps resolve disputes, makes decisions for the village.
So he's like a spiritual and a community leader.
Pretty much. And the Palol, he's a young boy, but he still holds a lot of status.
Wow, even a child can hold power in their society. And the Kaltmok.
They're essential, but considered lower in the hierarchy.
Right, remember all those rules about interactions.
Exactly. There's not allowed to touch the Palol, can't even share the same space in the dairy.
Wow, such a rigid system.
It is. But it's not about like power or oppression. It's about upholding their beliefs about purity and sacredness. Maintaining that balance is crucial for them.
Okay, I see that. So they have the two main clans, the Tivalial and Tartharol. But there's also this concept of a pole. What's that all about?
The pole is another layer of their social organization. It's like a sacred dairy priest division within each clan.
Okay, so even within a clan, there are subdivisions. And these pole, they matter.
Right. Yeah. They have their own titers, dairies, rituals, even specific herds of buffalo.
Wow. It's like a clan within a clan.
Exactly. And there are rules about marriage between members of different pole. The rituals can even vary depending on your pole.
That's a lot to keep track of.
It is. But their oral traditions are strong.
So they pass down this knowledge from generation to generation.
Exactly. And thankfully, anthropologists like Rivers have documented a lot of it.
Right. We're lucky to have that record.
We are.
So even in cultures that may seem like simple on the surface, there's often a whole lot going on underneath.
Oh, yeah. The more you dig, the more you uncover.
And that's what I love about studying these different cultures. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
It's an endless journey of discovery.
It is. Now, one thing that's been like a recurring theme is the importance of ritual.
Yeah, it's everywhere in total life.
It's how they make sense of the world, connect to the divine.
And maintain harmony. Within the community, with the natural world.
They have rituals for everything. Milking the buffalo, churning butter.
Entering the dairy, greeting each other.
Celebrating, mourning. It's like every action is infused with a sense of the sacred.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
So out of all the rituals Rivers observed, which ones stood out to you?
Well, that Pulkermock ceremony is pretty striking. The one that starts the process of becoming a wursel.
Right. The symbolic cleansing.
Exactly.
And what about the wursel ceremony itself? The big one.
That one's amazing. The procession to the Thai dairy, the greeting by the elders, the lighting of the lamp. It's a powerful experience.
And then there's the Palol ordination.
Oh, yeah. That one's on another level.
It is. So those are just a few examples, but they really give you a sense of how central ritual is to Toda life.
And it's a reminder that even in today's world, there are still cultures that live in this close harmony with nature and tradition.
It's pretty inspiring, actually. Now, we've been talking a lot about the ordained priests, but what about their everyday lives? What does it actually mean to be a wursel?
It's a life of strict ritual observance, constant dedication to the sacred buffalo.
Sounds intense.
It is. They follow so many rules. It governs every aspect of their life, what they eat, who they can talk to.
So walk me through a typical day for a wursel. What's the first thing they do?
Up before sunrise.
Wow, dedicated.
They cleanse themselves, put on their special cloak before entering the dairy. Cleanliness is paramount.
Right.
They believe that any impurity could, offend the gods, disrupt the harmony.
So it's not just physical cleanliness, it's about spiritual purity.
Exactly. And once they're inside the dairy,
What happens then?
they light a sacred lamp, offer prayers. Then there are a series of ritual actions. Chanting, ringing the mani, using different objects.
They have so many special objects.
They do. And each one has a purpose. For instance, there's the codfoth.
What's that?
It's a churning stick.
Oh, okay, for making butter. Wait, they have a special stick for that?
Well, okay, for making butter.
Yeah.
And they believe it's essential for creating, ritually pure butter.
It's fascinating how even something as simple as making butter becomes this sacred act.
For the Todas, nothing is really just simple.
Right. It's all connected to their beliefs. And the wursel, he does all of this himself.
Well, he has help from the Palol and the Kultmock, but he oversees everything, makes sure it's all done correctly.
Makes sense. And what about interaction with other people? Are there rules about that too?
Oh, yeah. They can't have any contact with women. And even with men, it's limited. They can only speak to other ordained priests.
Wow, that's a very solitary life. So different from our modern world.
It is. But they see it as necessary to maintain the purity of the dairy, their connection to the divine.
Wow, that's commitment. And they can't even sleep in the Thai dairy, right?
That's right. They sleep in a separate hut a little distance away. And there's even a hierarchy in where they sleep.
There's a hierarchy for everything.
Pretty much. The Palol sleeps in a hut attached to the Thai dairy, but the Kultmock has to sleep outside the whole enclosure.
So their sleeping arrangements reflect their social standing and their level of ritual purity?
Exactly. It's all connected.
And what about food?
It's all about avoiding anything that could, offend the gods. Their diet is a reflection of their commitment to their sacred duties.
So they have to be careful about what they eat.
Oh, very careful. No meat, no eggs, no fish.
Wow, that's restrictive.
It is. They mostly eat dairy products, grains, vegetables. It's a very simple diet.
It's like the ultimate cleanse. A far cry from how we eat today, that's for sure.
It is. But for the Todas, this simple way of eating, it's not about deprivation, it's about purity. It's part of their spiritual practice.
Right, it's all connected. And they believe that by sticking to these rules, they're ensuring the well-being of their community, staying in harmony with the divine. It's pretty profound, actually.
It is.
Okay, so we've zoomed in on the daily lives of these priests, but let's zoom back out. What role do these taideries and all the rituals that surround them play in the overall functioning of Toda society?
They're at the center of it all, really.
Yeah.
The Todas are like the heart and soul of Toda culture.
Okay, I can see that, but how so?
Well, think about it. They're not just places of worship. They're also social hubs. Places where people gather, celebrate festivals, make decisions that affect the whole community.
So like a community center with a spiritual twist.
Exactly. They're places where the Todas connect with their ancestors, seek guidance from the divine. It's where their power comes from.
Powerful stuff. And what about economically? Do the toad dairies play a role there too?
Oh, absolutely. That's where the milk from the sacred buffalo is processed, turned into butter, ghee. These are essential food products for the Todas, so it's a place of economic activity as well.
Right. So it's social, economic, and of course, spiritual. What do the Todas believe about the taideries and how they influence their whole worldview?
They believe that the taideries are where the gods dwell, and that the rituals they perform there, they maintain the balance between the human world and the divine. They believe that the well-being of the whole community is tied to how pure and sacred these dairies are.
Wow, that's a big responsibility. It's like the fate of their entire community rests on these dairies and the rituals performed inside.
Exactly. It's a huge part of their belief system.
We've talked a lot about the ordained priests, the Wurzel, and the Pelal, but what about the women in Toda society? Do they have any role in these rituals, these sacred spaces?
It's a good question. And it's important to remember that while women aren't allowed to enter the taideries or participate directly in those rituals.
Okay, so they're excluded from that part of it.
Right. But that doesn't mean they're not important. They play a vital role in the community.
So what do?
They take care of the domestic sphere. Cooking, cleaning, raising the children.
Right, the traditional roles.
But it's more than that. They create a sense of stability, allowing the men to focus on their religious duties.
It's a partnership.
Exactly. They also help with some of the more, day-to-day aspects of dairy production.
So they're involved with the buffalo, just not the sacred ones.
Exactly. They can milk the buffalo that are used for, regular purposes, but they're not allowed to touch the sacred buffalo that are associated with the taideries. Again, that line between the sacred and the profane.
So even though they're excluded from the most sacred spaces, they're still essential to how the whole system functions.
Absolutely. Toda society wouldn't work without them.
Now, I have to admit, when I was researching the Todas, I was kind of thrown by their funeral rituals. They're not what I was expecting at all.
Oh, yeah. What surprised you?
Well, for starters, they have this belief that when a person dies, their soul travels to this place called Amnodor.
A mythical land in the west, beyond the Nilgiri hills.
Right. A journey to the afterlife, and all their funeral rituals are designed to help the soul get there safely.
Exactly. The rituals act as a guide, a map for the soul.
So what happens when a Toda person dies? Take me through it.
Well, first, the body has to be prepared. And that's actually done by the Kodas.
Ah, so even in death, we see that connection between the tribes.
It's always there. The Kodas wash the body, dress it, and then
what?
they place it on a bamboo bier
Okay.
and carry it to a spot outside the village where it's cremated.
Cremation. Okay, that makes sense. And during the cremation, what happens?
The mourners gather around the pyre, chanting prayers, offering gifts to the deceased.
What kind of gifts?
Things they believe will be useful in the afterlife. Food, clothing, tools.
Right.
It's a very solemn occasion, but it's not the end of the rituals.
Right. There's more.
Oh yeah, lots more. There are ceremonies that continue for days, even weeks after the cremation, all to help that soul find its way to Amnodor.
It's really beautiful, actually. It shows how much they care for the departed.
It's about community, about supporting each other, even in death.
Now, there's this custom that I found particularly interesting. They erect these stone memorials.
Ethical.
Kerpo, right?
Yes. Kerpo. Fascinating, aren't they?
They are, but what's interesting is that they're sometimes built years after the person died.
It's not uncommon, no. Building a kerpo is a big deal. Lots of labor involved.
Right, makes sense. So why wait?
Well, sometimes it's a matter of resources.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about social dynamics, you know?
Ah, okay. Like families vying for the best spot, the most impressive Kerpo.
Exactly. And the Kerpo itself, it often represents the person's status, their family's standing in the community.
So it's not just a memorial, it's a statement. What do they look like, these Kerpo?
Well, they vary, but typically there's this large, upright stone slab, often with carvings.
Carvings of what?
Images of buffalo, the sun, the moon, important symbols in their cosmology.
Makes sense.
Sometimes there are scenes from the person's life, their achievements.
It's like a visual biography, etched in stone.
Exactly. And putting up a Kerpo, it's a big event. The whole clan gets involved.
So it's not just about honoring the dead, it's about strengthening the community.
It's all connected.
Always is. So they choose a spot, they gather the stone, they do these intricate carvings.
All by hand. It's quite amazing.
It is. They didn't have modern tools back then. It really shows their dedication, their craftsmanship.
It does.
And in the end, you have this Kerpo standing tall against the landscape, a permanent reminder of the person who's gone.
Beautiful tribute.
It is. And a reminder that for the Todas, honoring their dead is about way more than just duty. It's a core part of who they are.
It's about respect for tradition, for their ancestors.
And we can't talk about Toda culture without talking about their relationship with the buffalo.
No, we can't. It's fundamental to everything they do.
Okay, let's get into it. Tell me about their buffalo veneration.
Well, they believe that the buffalo was a gift from the goddess Taikirtsi. Remember, the creator and protector of the Todas.
Oh yeah, she's a big deal.
She is. And the Todas, they treat the buffalo with so much respect and reverence.
And that's reflected in how they live their lives, right?
Absolutely. Their economy, their social structure, their rituals, it all revolves around the buffalo. It's like the very heart of their culture.
It's incredible how an animal can hold such an important place in a culture. So how do they show their reverence?
Well, each buffalo gets its own name. And those names, they're passed down through generations.
No way. They keep track of buffalo family trees.
They do. It helps determine the social standing of the families who own the buffalo.
So the buffalo is like a symbol of their heritage.
Exactly. But it goes beyond names. They have all these rituals, taboos that govern how they interact with the animals.
Like what?
Well, for example, some buffalo are considered sacred.
The ones associated with the Thai dairies.
Exactly. Only ordained priests can touch them, milk them, and even within the herds, there's a hierarchy.
A hierarchy of buffalo. That's fascinating.
It is.
So what's the purpose of these sacred buffalo?
They're not used for everyday things. Their milk is only used for rituals, and their meat is never eaten.
They're like symbols of the divine.
Exactly. They represent that divine presence within the Toda world.
Right.
They're a source of blessing, protection for the community.
It's a totally different way of thinking about animals than what we're used to.
It is. It challenges us to consider our own relationship with the natural world.
It does. Okay, so we have these sacred two dairies, but then there are also the more common everyday village dairies.
Right. One for the gods, one for the people, you could say.
Huh, exactly. And those village dairies, they're where they get their everyday dairy products.
Exactly. Butter, ghee, buttermilk.
All the good stuff. And the rituals in the village dairy, are they as like intense as the ones in the Toda dairy?
Not quite. They're still important, but more relaxed. Women are allowed to enter and help out. It's a more practical space.
So they've got this balance. The sacred rituals of the Thai dairy, and then the more practical, everyday work of the village dairy.
Exactly. It's a balance that works for them.
It's pretty cool, actually. Now, we've talked a lot about the Wursel, but what about the Palal, that young boy who assists him? What's his role exactly?
He's like an apprentice, learning from the Wursel.
Right, but he's also considered to be, like, really close to the divine.
He is. And his duties, they're all about maintaining the purity of the Thai dairy, making sure the rituals are done correctly.
What does he actually do in there? Give me some examples.
Well, he's in charge of the sacred fire.
They have a sacred fire.
Oh, yeah. It burns inside the Thai dairy.
Oh.
And it can never be allowed to go out. It's like the heart of the dairy.
Wow, so he's got a big responsibility. What else?
He helps the Wursel with all sorts of things. Offering milk to the gods, ringing the maini, chanting.
It sounds like a lot for a young boy.
It is. But they take their duties very seriously.
What kind of qualities does a Palal need to have?
He has to be pious, pure. They choose a boy who hasn't reached puberty yet.
Right. Purity is key.
Exactly. And during his time as Palal, he has to follow a very strict set of rules. He lives a very secluded life, totally dedicated to the dairy.
It's a totally different world.
It is. It's a kind of initiation of preparation for adulthood.
And how long does a boy serve as Palol?
It depends, but usually for several years. And when his time is up, there's a ceremony to mark his return to the community.
I bet that's a big celebration.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's happy to have him back. They recognize how important his service was.
Makes sense. Now, I know the Todas have some pretty interesting beliefs about how their Taideris came to be.
Oh, yeah. Their origin stories are fascinating.
Tell me everything.
Well, the first Taideri, they believe it was created by the goddess Taikirtsi herself. The story goes that she was so pleased with the Todas, their devotion, that she wanted to give them a special place to worship her, to honor the sacred buffalo.
So she built them a Taideri?
Well, not exactly built. According to the myth, she made a divine buffalo emerge from the earth, and its body became the first Taideri.
Whoa, that's amazing. So the Taideri is like literally born from a divine buffalo. It makes sense that it's so sacred to them.
Exactly. It's not just a building, it's a living representation of the divine. And that makes the rituals even more significant. They believe that by performing these rituals correctly, they're honoring Taikirtsi, keeping everything in balance.
It's like a direct link to the goddess herself.
It is. It shows how their beliefs shape everything they do.
Okay, so that's the first Taideri. What about the others? How do they explain those?
Well, there are lots of stories, often involving conflicts between the gods. The Todas believe that even the gods get jealous, angry. They're not perfect.
So it's like divine drama.
Exactly. And those conflicts, they often lead to the creation of new Taideris.
Yeah. Can you give me an example?
There's one story about two gods. One was super jealous of the other's beautiful Taideri.
I can relate.
Right. But instead of fighting, the jealous god decided to create his own Taideri, even bigger and better than the first.
So it's like a divine rivalry, and that rivalry leads to the creation of a new Taideri.
Exactly. It's a fun story, but it also serves a purpose.
Oh, what do you mean?
These stories, they reinforce the power of the Wursel, the importance of the rituals.
Right. It's like if the dairies were created by gods, then the people who take care of them must be pretty important.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the creation myths, but we can't forget about the seasonal buffalo migrations.
Ah, the migrations. A spectacular sight.
I bet. I'm picturing this massive herd of buffalo moving across the hills. What makes them migrate?
It's mostly practical. The Todas move the herds to different grazing areas depending on the season.
Makes sense. They got to keep those buffalo fed.
Exactly. During the dry season, they'll go up to higher elevations where there's more rain, more vegetation. And then when the monsoon comes, they bring them back down to the valleys.
So they're following the natural patterns of the land. Smart.
It's a system that's worked for them for centuries.
Yeah.
But it's not just about practicality.
Right. There's got to be some ritual involved.
Always.
What kind of rituals do they do?
Well, before they head out, they'll perform ceremonies to ask for protection for the herd.
To keep them safe on their journey.
Exactly.
And they probably make offerings to Taikirtsi, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Offering milk at the Taideri, chanting prayers.
Makes sense. And I bet they decorate the buffalo, too.
Oh, yeah. The lead buffalo especially. Garlands of flowers, colorful cloths. It's like sending them off in style.
I love how they bring that sense of ceremony into even the most, practical aspects of life.
It's all part of their worldview. And the migration itself, it's a time of celebration, but also a time of, reflection.
It must be a pretty grueling journey.
Oh, for sure. They're traveling for weeks
Oh,
over
yeah.
difficult terrain.
Deep slopes, rivers.
All of it. But the Todas are tough. They're used to it. It's in their blood.
And those migrations, they affect their relationships with the other tribes, too, right?
Definitely. Think about the Badagas, the farmers. They rely on the Todas for dairy products.
Right.
So when the Todas migrate, it disrupts that trade, can even lead to shortages.
So it's like this reminder that even cultures that seem isolated are actually connected in all these complex ways.
Exactly. And it's not just the Badagas. The Kodas are involved too. The Todas will hire them to help build temporary shelters, repair tools.
So it's a time of disruption, but also cooperation.
It is. They had to adapt to each other, find ways to keep the peace.
Now, speaking of disruption, I can't imagine what it must have been like for the Todas when the Europeans showed up, especially the British in the 19th century, with their ideas about, progress and civilization. Did they try to change the Todas?
They did. The British often saw Toda culture as, primitive. They introduced new laws, built roads.
Right, the whole civilizing mission.
Exactly. And they encouraged the Todas to convert to Christianity.
Wow. So they really pushed their own values on the Todas. How did that go over?
It was mixed, really. Some resisted, fiercely.
Hmm.
Others embrace the changes.
I bet that caused some tension within the community, like who wants to hold on to tradition, who's willing to adapt.
Exactly. It's a classic clash. Tradition versus modernity.
It's a story we see repeated throughout history.
It is. And the Toda's experience reminds us that these challenges aren't unique to any one time or place. It's a human story.
So how do they respond to this pressure to change?
They were resilient. Some things they held on to tightly, like their core beliefs about the buffalo and the Nilgiris. Those rituals, that spiritual core, it stayed strong.
But I imagine they had to adapt in other ways.
Oh yeah. The British brought a cash economy to the Nilgiri Hills,
Right.
and that forced the Todas to find new ways to make a living. They couldn't just rely on their herds anymore.
So what did they do?
Some started working on tea plantations, others sold their dairy products to the Europeans who were coming to the hill stations.
So they found ways to participate in this new system, but I bet it wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't. There were both benefits and drawbacks.
Like what?
Well, they had more contact with the outside world, more opportunities, but it also made them vulnerable to exploitation.
And probably caused some cultural erosion, too.
It's always a balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
Holding on to what's important while adapting to survive.
And the Todas, they did a pretty amazing job. Okay, let's get back to those Nilgiris. We've talked about them a lot, but I'm still curious. What actually happens in there? What are those rituals like?
It's all about honoring the gods, maintaining purity, ensuring the well-being of everyone.
Right, but what does that look like? What do they actually do?
Well, the Wurzel, he enters the Nilgiri, after purifying himself, of course. He lights a sacred lamp, offers prayer,
Okay, I'm picturing that.
and then he uses all those sacred objects, the mani, the pawet. He performs specific actions, chants, invocations.
Wow, it sounds like a very choreographed performance.
It is. It's very symbolic, very intentional. It's how they connect with the divine.
And the atmosphere in there, it must be pretty intense.
Oh, it is. It's a space of reverence and awe. It's where the everyday becomes sacred. Like milking a buffalo isn't just a chore, it's a ritual that sustains them, body and soul.
It's incredible how much thought and care goes into every detail. It's a reminder that for the Todas, these rituals aren't just like empty gestures.
Oh no, they're the foundation of their whole existence.
Right, it's how they connect with their ancestors, ensure the well-being of the community.
Exactly.
And speaking of ancestors, we got to talk about their beliefs about the afterlife. Amnadar.
Yes. That mythical land in the West.
Right, so they believe that when you die, your soul goes on a journey to Amnadar. And their funeral rituals, the cremation, the irudkut, it's all about helping the soul make that transition.
Exactly, guiding them on their journey.
So death, it's not an ending for them, it's a transition. It's beautiful, actually.
It is. It's about supporting each other, even in death.
Their beliefs about death, they're so connected to their beliefs about life, the respect for tradition, the reverence for the sacred.
And the importance of community. It's all there, throughout their lives and in their deaths. It's like a circle.
A circle of life.
Exactly.
We've covered so much, the buffalo, the rituals, the social structure, the myths. It's been an incredible journey.
It has. The Todas are a truly fascinating people.
They are. And what really stands out to me is their faith, their dedication to their traditions, their cultural heritage. It's inspiring, actually.
It is, especially in today's world. They remind us that it's possible to hold on to what's important, even as the world around you changes.
And that cultural diversity is something to be cherished, not erased.
Absolutely. The Todas offer a unique perspective, a different way of seeing the world, and that's valuable.
Okay, ready for one last deep dive?
Hit me with it.
Let's talk about Toda marriage customs.
Now those are interesting.
They are, and a little bit, well, unexpected.
That's one way to put it.
Okay, spill the beans. What makes Toda marriages so unique?
Well, for starters, they practice polyandry.
Polyandry. Wait, that was...
One woman can have multiple husbands.
Whoa! Okay, that's different.
It is. Not very common, but for the Todas, it's been part of their culture for a long time.
So how does it work? How do they choose the husbands?
Well, the most common form is fraternal polyandry.
Fraternal, so like brothers.
Exactly. A group of brothers share a wife.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it makes sense when you think about their social structure, their economy.
Right, they're all about keeping the land, the buffalo, within the family.
Exactly. So having brothers share a wife, it prevents all that from being divided up.
So it's practical, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about the emotional side of things? How do they, manage those relationships?
Rivers observe that there's a lot of cooperation and mutual respect within these families. The brothers often work together, share responsibilities.
So it's like a team effort.
It is. And it really makes you question our own assumptions about marriage.
Right.
Like, who says it has to be one man, one woman?
Right. The Todas are living proof that there are other ways to do things.
Exactly.
So the husbands are usually brothers, but how are they chosen? Is it arranged? Does the woman have a say?
It's usually a bit of both. The families will start the process,
Right.
with the arrangements.
Right.
But the woman's consent is important, too. It's not like she's forced into anything.
So there is a level of choice involved. That's good. And what about the kids? Like, how do they figure out who the father is?
Well, traditionally, they didn't really have a concept of biological paternity.
Really?
Yeah. All the brothers were considered to be the fathers. And the kids, they would call all of them father.
Wow. That's a different way of looking at family. But I bet that's changed, right? With modern ideas about, DNA and all that.
You're right. As the Todas have come into more contact with the outside world, they've adopted some of those ideas. So now you see more emphasis on biological paternity, which has led to some changes in their marriage practices.
It's fascinating how those outside influences can change a culture, sometimes in ways that you might not expect.
It is. It shows that culture isn't static. It's always changing, adapting.
Okay, so we've talked about the practical, the social, but what about the emotional side of these polyandrous marriages? What did Rivers observe about the relationships?
He saw a lot of emphasis on harmony, cooperation.
Okay.
The brothers would treat each other with respect, work together, and the wife, she would often develop close bonds with each of them.
So it wasn't just about convenience, there was genuine affection there. That's pretty amazing, actually.
It is. It challenges our ideas about what love and marriage can be.
It shows that there are so many different ways to create meaningful relationships.
Exactly. And the Todas, they offer us a glimpse into that diversity.
It's a reminder that different cultures don't just do things differently, they feel things differently too.
Exactly.
Now, I know the Todas have a strong tradition of storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. It's how they pass down their history, their beliefs.
Right. It's like a living history book. What kind of stories do they tell?
Lots of stories about Tekirsi, of course.
Makes sense. The creator goddess.
Right. Stories about her creating the world, giving them the buffalo.
So it's about their origins, their connection to the divine.
Exactly. And they have stories about courage, loyalty, respect for tradition.
And I bet they have stories that explain their customs, their ritual.
Oh, definitely. It gives those practices a deeper meaning.
So the stories, they're not just entertaining, they're educational too.
Absolutely. They teach the children about their heritage, their values.
It's how they keep their culture alive.
Exactly.
Did Rivers write down any of these stories?
He did. He recorded several in his book. They give us a fascinating glimpse into their worldview.
I love that. It's like we're getting a direct connection to their culture through their own words.
It's a privilege to be able to read them.
It is. We're so lucky to have those records. Now, speaking of records, I know Rivers was particularly interested in the Toda language.
Oh yeah, he was fascinated by it.
What's so special about it?
Well, it's a Dravidian language.
Dravidia.
Yeah, a family of languages spoken mostly in southern India.
Okay, got it.
And Toda, it's quite unique, even within the Dravidian family.
How so?
Well, it's got a really complex sound system.
Oh, like what?
Lots of different vowels, consonants, and the grammar is really interesting too. Rivers actually spent a lot of time studying it, creating a grammar of the language.
Wow, he's a busy guy.
He was. And thanks to his work, we have a much better understanding of the Toda language, how it relates to other Dravidian languages.
So it's not just about preserving their stories, it's about preserving their language too.
Exactly. Language is a vital part of any culture.
Totally. Now, one thing that really stood out to me in Rivers' book was his description of Toda music.
Oh yeah, their music is quite unique. Oh yeah,
Okay.
their music is quite unique.
What makes it so special?
Well, it's very vocal-centric.
Vocal-centric, meaning...
They don't use a lot of instruments.
Huh, interesting. So it's mostly singing.
Yeah. And their singing style, it's very distinct.
Yeah, so.
It's very, how do I describe it? It's like a chant, almost.
Not chant.
Yeah, very rhythmic, repetitive, and they often sing in unison.
So no, like soloists or anything?
Not really, no. It's more about the collective sound, the voices blending together.
It sounds kind of hypnotic.
It is. And their songs, they often tell stories.
Ah, so it ties back into their oral tradition.
Exactly. It's another way of passing down their history, their beliefs.
Right. It's like their music is a living archive of their culture.
It is. And rivers. He actually recorded some of their songs. He even tried to transcribe the melodies.
Wow, that's dedication. I'd love to hear what Toda music sounds like.
It's pretty amazing, actually. Very haunting, very evocative. It really transports you to another time and place.
It sounds like it. Now, we've talked about their music, their stories, their rituals, but there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap things up.
What's that?
Their relationship with the modern world. I mean, we've talked about how the British arrival impacted them, but things have continued to change, right?
Oh, absolutely. The world's not standing still.
Right. So how are the Todas navigating the 21st century?
Well, it's a mixed bag, to be honest.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, they've benefited from some of the developments of modern India,
Yeah.
Better healthcare, education.
Right.
But they've also faced new challenges.
Like what?
Well, there's been a lot of pressure on their land, development, tourism. It's encroaching on their traditional territory.
Ah, that's a problem.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's led to conflicts with other groups.
So their way of life, it's becoming harder to maintain.
In some ways, yes. But the Todas, they're incredibly resilient. They're finding ways to adapt to preserve their culture.
That's good to hear. How are they doing that?
Well, there are organizations working to support them to protect their land rights. And the Todas themselves, they're actively engaging with the modern world while still holding on to their traditions.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
It's like, how do you move forward without losing sight of who you are, where you come from?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a question that a lot of cultures are grappling with today.
Yeah.
And the Todas, they're showing us that it's possible, that you can embrace change without sacrificing your identity.
It's a powerful message and a hopeful one.
I think so too.
We've explored so much in this deep dive into the world of the Todas, their sacred buffalo, their fascinating rituals, their unique way of life.
It's been an incredible journey.
It has. And I think what really sticks with me is their unwavering commitment to their traditions, their culture. It's inspiring, actually. In a world that's constantly changing, they remind us that some things are worth holding on to.
Absolutely. Their story is a reminder that cultural diversity is a treasure, that different ways of seeing the world, different ways of living, they enrich us all.
I think that's a perfect place to end our exploration of the Todas. A small tribe living in a remote corner of India, but with lessons that resonate far beyond their hills.
Lessons about resilience, faith, community.
And about the power of holding on to what makes us unique, even in a world that's constantly trying to make us all the same.